Dear Mr. Thile, hi, my name is Colin Andrews. I'm an aspiring film critic, video essayist, and filmmaker. I hope that you are doing well while all of this is going on, and if you aren't, I hope this letter might make you feel a little bit better. I first found out about you through Nickel Creek in my adolescence, when I hadn't fully committed to the effort of exposing myself to as much music as possible. Seeing as my mother was a bit more old school, I didn't have access to the internet or anything along those lines during that time, so the way I found my music was through the old-fashioned manner of buying CDs and such. In the month of July, I found your debut album in the middle of Borders, if you can even remember that beautiful bookstore anymore, and decided to give it a try. I can't remember why, but I am thankful I did. I really liked it, and I continued through your discography, or at least the discography you had at the time. Some of my fondest moments were going to that same Borders and scrounging around the CD section until I found this side. I was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of Pittsburgh with my mother, and I have wonderful memories of the summer where we would sit right in the middle of the living room, read together, and listen to the album. The next year I found Why Should the Fire Die at the very same Borders. And this was the one that hit me. Everything was so beautiful. The instrumentation provided a sense of escapism from the mundane nature of my everyday life, only balanced by the lyrics that were incredibly sobering, yet somehow had a tinge of optimism to them. Fast forward 5 years and I'm 17. In the past 5 years, a lot of things have happened. My father has died after having a multitude of seizures. My mother and I moved away from all of the family and have consequently lost connection with all of them. The only person we did maintain contact with, my grandfather, has died of cancer. I've been diagnosed with chronic depression and a splash of social anxiety. I'd broken many girls' hearts, so much so that I lost count and had convinced myself that I was incapable of feeling love in a romantic way. I'm not telling you these things to make you feel bad for me, just keep in mind it's for the context. One night in my senior year of high school, when I had come home from my final homecoming, where I'd actually been on court, I was feeling overwhelmed with nostalgia. Thus, I decided to take a look into my old CD collection. I went through a Kevin Rudolph album and a Lennox Lewis album, respectively, before I came upon my Nickel Creek section. I had completely forgotten about your existence, but the emotion I had felt listening to you all in my adolescence instantly came running back. I decided to start with Why Should the Fire Die and popped it into my CD player. Yes, I had a CD player in the year of 2013. And 47 minutes later, I was broken down and crying in a ball on the floor. This was my album. This was an album that encompassed everything I had felt and still do feel in my life in a mere 14 tracks. The title track addresses one's parents still being in love while using the past tense. My mother and father loved each other until the very end, regardless of the issues they went through together. There are multiple tracks addressing the lack of empathy and complications that come with relationships in an incredibly organic way. That's all I had and have ever felt in romantic relationships. Jealous of the Moon talks about being afraid to reach for your dreams. Doubting Thomas discusses issues with faith and trust. When in Rome, Evelyn, Can't Complain, Helena, every single song on this project resonated with me in a completely different way than it had previously. I listened to something off of that album every day. It has influenced me incredibly in not only an artistic manner, but more importantly in the way I approach life. And in the year of 2015, I was still enjoying Nickel Creek at a very high level. However, silly me, I was completely unprepared when I was scrolling through the new releases section of Spotify in January, as I have a really bad habit being invested in religiously following music at the beginning of every year, and falling off after about 4 months. But regardless, I saw The Phosphorescent Blues by Punch Brothers. I'm a pretty big bluegrass guy, so I decided to listen to the album, and lo and behold, your voice started coming through the speakers of my 2014 MacBook Air. I jolted to attention. I had never known that you had a different project other than Nickel Creek, so immediately the ante was upped. I wasn't expecting good anymore, I was expecting great. And I didn't get great. I got spectacular. To this very day, The Phosphorescent Blues is my album of the decade and quite possibly my favorite album of all time. Nickel Creek was so soothing and complex, but Punch Brothers was so much more. More technically proficient, more risky and experimental with the instrumentation, more cynical about the world. everything I had been craving recently. It has been with me throughout so many different phases of my life. It was my barrier from the outside world whenever I was sitting in my downtown coffee shop and writing scripts, videos, anything. It made me feel like I was somewhere in Europe, away from the hellhole of my existence, enjoying my life as a writer. It was my shield from communication with raucous college kids raring to go to the football game and screaming at the top of their lungs. It was an aid in studying alone in the rec area of my apartment clubhouse with nobody around to even threaten distraction. I'd even use passe-pied on my jogs around my neighborhood every morning, and it would always make me tear up a little bit every time. I can't even explain why, but it would never fail. Again, flash forward to August of 2017, and I'm on a flight to Seattle to see my uncle and his newlywed husband. I'm looking for music, and as I always seem to do, land on Punch Brothers again. And for the first time in 2.5 actual years, I had a thought that made me feel stupid as all get out. They must have other music, right? And just like that, I was hooked on the rest of your catalog. My favorite moment of my whole life came from that trip, when I had just gotten out of seeing Baby Driver at the theater and explored the city alone, just walking around downtown Seattle on my own and listening to Who's Feeling Young Now and Ahoy. The feeling was simply euphoric. It was almost topped by a couple of weeks later when we caught you on your summer tour with I'm With Her. I had a grin plastered on my face and was proud to sing along to every song. In my head, of course. I'm not that guy. I drove home in the haze of a summer's night, just content with where the direction of my life was going. Then my junior year of university hit. I was more depressed than I ever had been. I was living in an apartment on my own and rarely went outside of it other than going to classes and movies. Needless to say, the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018 were not healthy for me in the slightest. However, in the summer of 2018, I started to pick myself back up again. And that is partially due to All Ashore. This album had a different vibe to all of your other albums to me. There was a level of rallying cry there that I took to heart. Did I only interpret it this way because it was exactly what I needed at the moment? Perhaps. But also, perhaps not. Regardless of that, it was my constant soundtrack throughout the next year, which led me to completing my bachelor's degree. I know that I have so much to say thank you for, but over a decade of memories and thank yous can be hard to cover, so I'll try to make it concise. Thank you for being there when there were few others who were. Thank you for being one of the only consistent things in my life after my father passed away. Thank you, Mr. Thile, for giving me the courage to fight against adequate and strive for that julep on the porch. Sincerely, Colin Andrews.